The big question I want to ask today is how an FPS game's movement can affect its gunfights, and putting all my biases aside for this one video, we're going to take a look at Valorant and CS and compare how its small differences in movement can actually create a really large difference in how the gunfights take place. Now, as you probably know, Valorant and CS have extremely similar gameplay mechanics. I mean, the guns are similar, the objective is the same, and the movement is also pretty similar too. Emphasis on similar. So today I want to talk about these slight differences in the movement and how it can actually impact most of how the player base moves in a gunfight. Before I do start though, I want to state that there is technically no 100% correct way to move when you shoot an enemy, just less dangerous ways to shoot and more viable ways to shoot, if that makes any sense. Also, my arguments are empirical based, not evidence based, meaning that they're mostly based on my observation. So if you have a problem with that, then okay, one more thing before I start, please sub. I'm about to hit 1k subs. Thank you, and let's start. To start with Valorant, the two biggest differences, at least in the core gameplay mechanics of Valorant, is that the movement speed is significantly slower than CS2, and the gun sprays are random after a certain point. And sure, maybe these two arguments are brought up mostly from Valorant haters, but there is a little bit of shred of truth in it. Believe it or not, it does actually create a pretty drastic difference in the gunfights that occur as opposed to CS2. In my time playing Valorant, I've noticed that in medium to long range fights, even short range sometimes, crouch spraying is really not that competitively viable, mostly because of the reasons I have just listed. For one, the spray of the Vandal randomizes after 10 to 15 bullets, so if you by any chance like to use the Vandal, then that means that you probably cannot practice the spray consistently, and that would mean that crouch spraying is a lot more dodgy to perform, and it relies on a degree of randomness. Let's talk about the slower movement for a moment as well. The hardest part about switching from CS to Valorant and then from Valorant back to CS, at least for me, is movement. In a game where there can be so much confusion created by all the utility, you really want to move a lot faster, and with the slow movement, it's really made increasingly difficult. In terms of the crouch spraying though, you can probably imply that if your spray fails to hit the target and you need to move, uncrouching and running somewhere else would be a little more inconvenient. You'd basically be putting a big target on you. In 2021, coming to Valorant from CSGO was extremely difficult, as I am a crouch sprayer, and I'm sure you can probably expect that I took a really long time to adjust. I'm sure all of you have at some point heard somebody say something like, 1 second is really precious in these games, or something like that, and honestly that is really true. A second could be all it takes between a victory and a loss, and in the context of movement, if you want to maximize your movement, at least in Valorant, and not be such an easy target, tap firing with the side of counter strafing is a lot more viable. Now, I'm not sure if the random sprays are an intentional design, but if it is, then that only points to one obvious conclusion, being that the developers actually want to discourage crouch spraying and nudge players toward tap firing, or at least spraying and praying at the very least. Now, I think it's not actually too bad of an idea or a main aiming mechanic, as tap firing necessitates a lot more discipline than just crouch spraying, which technically you can say that that takes a lot more skill than just crouch spraying. Now, if we take a look over at CS though, the core gameplay mechanics are completely different. Now, the movement is a decent bit faster, again empirical, and the sprays have set patterns. Because of these factors, crouch spraying is a lot more viable in CS than in Valorant, because you're able to recover so much faster after crouching. The stakes of crouch spraying are lower in this game, and actually, since the sprays have set patterns, it's really no longer seen as random, but technically as skillful to spray down your enemies. Now, I'm no Albert Einstein, but from personal experience, and probably your experience from the game as well, players tend to crouch spray in this game a lot more than tapping. So, does that mean crouch spraying in CS is better than tapping? Well, absolutely not. Now, I'd say they're both pretty situational, but counter strafing is a really powerful counter to crouch spraying, because if you're a moving target and someone's trying to spray you down, you're a lot harder to hit. I mean, that's literally Donk's entire shtick. Be a difficult target. This is also why counter strafing and tapping in Valorant is so much better than crouch spraying, because it's harder to hit a moving target. But once again, it is pretty reliant on your positioning, so there isn't really one correct answer for every single scenario. In the case of CS though, does that mean that crouch spraying is better than tap firing? Of course not. As I have just said, it is kinda really situational, and in some places you would want to crouch spray, and in some places you would probably want to tap, preferably or probably in longer distances. So what's the point of all of this? I mean, what's the big lesson you're supposed to learn after watching all of this? Honestly, I'm not too sure. I just wanted to make a video comparing the movements, and it's literally 2 a.m. and I have insomnia and I can't sleep. But I guess if you were to take one big lesson from this in a competitive standpoint, Valorant players, try to integrate counter-strafing and tap firing into your playstyle. It's gonna do you a lot of good. CS2 players, do the same. Honestly, even if it may not help in some fights, if you vary your movement when you do end up in a gunfight in either game, you'll literally become a more unpredictable opponent. Even if you are predictable in the macro, you'll be a lot more unpredictable in the micro sense. You'll be donk. Okay, well, I am done with ranting, and thanks for listening to another one of my wacky videos, my homies. Now, I'm going to ask again, so I apologize, but if you are able to, please subscribe to my channel, please. I mean, okay, you've watched all the way to the end, so might as well. And I'm also super close to a 4-digit sub count, which is low-key kind of exciting and kind of massive. Anyways, happy fragging in your future pugs in whichever game you play, Valorant or CS2. Have a good night, or morning, or afternoon. See ya!